Is the China crackdown just getting started? How far in or how deep in will we be with regards to Alibaba? Because this channel is ultimately only talking about Alibaba. So right now, I think we just really wanted to understand and to really speculate and to guess how much more will Alibaba as a business will be affected by CCP's policies, by CCP's regulatory requirements from here on. So we have been seeing that there's been a lot of drama surrounding Alibaba Group and around a lot of all these different Chinese tech stocks as well. The CCP actually did make a public stance saying that in the following 6 months, which is by the end of 2021, they would intensify a lot of their regulatory requirements and ensuring that a lot of all these tech companies stay in line and ensure that they do not engage in all these undesirable behaviors from the party's perspective. So let's really see, is this the end of Alibaba's regulatory problems or is there more to come? So before I start, I did create a Discord channel for all you bulls and bears of Alibaba. It's definitely a platform for you guys to discuss, debate, or even dispute different theses or different arguments. The primary objective of the Discord channel is really to create the entire network effect for people to share different articles, share different viewpoints, and for people to just create a community surrounding Alibaba, whether you love it or whether you hate the stock. I think we are all welcoming. So if you're interested, please click in the link in the description box down below. On top of that, I've also left my referral link for both Tiger and Moomoo brokers. They're essentially a China brokerage firm that they're expanding aggressively worldwide, especially in the Singapore and Southeast Asia region. So for those of you who haven't created, what are you waiting for? You can click in the referral link that I left in the description box down below. They're essentially running a lot of different promotions right now. Ultimately, it's best to just earn the free money, right? With that, let's get right into today's topic. Now, from Wall Street Journal, they did articulate the idea of China's corporate crackdown is just getting started. Signs point to more to mount ahead. So in recent months, China has blown up what would have been the world's initial largest public offering, launched probes into some of its biggest tech companies, and wiped out more than 1 trillion in market value while investors scramble for cover. So there are many signs that it isn't over yet. So funny enough, we will definitely be exploring this entire article about what Jing Yang, Keith Tsai, and Quintin Webb has to say about China's crackdown. So investors, analysts, and company executives believe that the government has a goal of ensuring companies do more to serve the Communist Party's economic, social, and national security concerns. Now, language is a very interesting thing. Let's say I rephrase the entire sentence. Investors, analysts, and companies executives believe that the government is ensuring companies to do more to not serve China's economic, social, and national security concerns. Would that make sense to you? I think ultimately, as a government's perspective, a lot of their job or a large part of what they're doing is to help the people advance further in terms of their economic expansion, in terms of their social status, and most importantly, protect and safeguard different national security problems. So the government's far-reaching ambition undersea promise serious and often unpredictable implications for businesses. These people say, and keeping foreign investors happy isn't a priority. I would have to give credit and acknowledge this fact that, hey, Chairman Xi actually do not really care too much about foreign investors. But that said, I think majority of the stock market is still held by their locals as well. So I believe that they are also concerned about local investors. So foreign investors isn't part of the priority, but ensuring that retail investors' stakes are not rocking up and down regardless of implication is also not what he wants to achieve as a government. So this round of governance storm has not yet reached the stage of coming down. Chinese regulators have taken more than 50 actual or reported actions spanning antitrust, finance, data security, and social equality problems. In a private meeting with representatives of global banks, so Fang Xinghai, the vice chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, told attendees that the recent crackdowns were meant to fix industry-specific problems and that China has no intention of decoupling from the global markets. I think this has been reiterated multiple times on multiple fronts. You have people from the senior officials of CCP, now even the chairman of the China Securities Commission is also singing the same tune. So at least I believe there's some sort of congruency, and in terms of their fire plan, they also have no intention of trying to pull out of this entire globalization efforts and initiative. So some financiers who attended said they weren't persuaded. They noted that Beijing had effectively torpedoed a multi-billion-dollar industry after school tutoring with a single administrative order. Hey, that's true, but the funny thing is, for those of them who has been following politics quite closely, CCP, as a government, did initiated and made a public stance on the increasing priority in scrutinizing and regulating the after-school tutoring industry, because they realized that it's causing a significant amount of problem in terms of social impact in China. So don't say that they didn't warn you. It's true that there is a single administrative order that entirely disrupted one industry. It's really like saying, hey, if the US government took a different stance and a different approach, saying that they do not want to legalize cannabis or weed in this case, would you still be investing in companies like TrueLeaf? That's really up for your own discretion. But of course, because in the US politics, there's a lot of gridlock. But like I said, if Biden signs a national security administrative order to ban all the weed selling companies, so I don't really like to pit myself against the government anyway. Next, Chinese authorities have sent mixed signals about what they intend to keep going. So state news agency Xinhua criticized online gaming as opium for the mind. So in a sign of how fragile investor sentiment has become, that was enough to trigger a market sell-off. The article later disappeared before re-emerging in a toned-down form without the opium for the mind line. Particularly worrisome to some investors and company officials is that regulators themselves don't seem to know where it all ends. In late July, regulators put forward new guidelines requiring companies to provide basic benefits to delivery drivers such as minimum wage and insurance coverage. The regulators gave little guidance and said it was also trying to figure it out. Funny thing is about this entire minimum wage and insurance coverage, I'm supposed they're talking about Meituan and Didi. Honestly speaking, maintaining a minimum wage and having proper insurance coverage, that's a minimum that any sort of this kind of high-tech company, for example Grab, should do for their drivers or for their cyclists or whoever that's working for them in a self-employed capacity. So by them not doing what is basic, considered in the US terms, regulators coming hard down on the companies is expected. And shouldn't it be basic human rights as well? I thought concerned citizens of the world should be extremely elated that a lot of all these regulators trying to safeguard all these different citizens' rights and their basic necessities. So I don't see why in this case where they start being hard on all these companies and start putting in regulatory requirement, because honestly speaking, if you were to compare the maturity of the market, the US is in a much better position than in China, and China is really learning a lot from the different counterparts, especially in the West or even in the Asian countries as well. I do agree that a lot of the regulators probably don't know where this all ends, because it's part and parcel of the learning process. Different companies have different nuances, and especially in China as well, they cannot just copy and just plonk everything that the US has done overseas and just apply it wholeheartedly without any amendments or changes to the entire policy making problem and agenda to the Chinese market. So it really is part and parcel of the learning process, and in the meantime, investors will probably get burned, or for those of you who invest in wrong companies or invest in wrong industries that is explicitly stated by the Chinese Communist Party to not invest in them, then I really don't get your mindset and why are you pitting yourself against the government. China has a history of engineering sudden policy changes according to long-term goals, and sometimes the consequences are severe. And the tensions with the US have remained high under President Biden. That has sharpened China's focus on security and self-sufficiency. So Mr. Xi is also moving assertively to address social, economic, and national security priorities that in many cases have lingered for years. China's to-do list is long. Among other things, authorities want to tackle runaway education, healthcare, and housing costs, all of which could make it harder to arrest the country's decline in population growth. So for those of you who do not appreciate this long list of to-do lists, let me just explain a little bit further. Runaway education, essentially they're trying to target the after-tutoring industry. Next up, about education specifically, look at the amount of college debt in US, for example. Think about the huge amount of pressure and strain on the government's debt especially as well. And all these outstanding loans on the bank, what's going to happen? Secondly, on healthcare, also the same, not really trying to flame the US government or not really trying to flame the US system. Healthcare is also just mind-blowing. Just look at all the different accounts online about how the US healthcare system, despite being privatized, how people are not being able to afford normal insurance and ultimately basic needs and basic access to healthcare. Third, about housing costs. Housing costs in particular, I think you can reference to Hong Kong. I think if you really understand and appreciate a little bit more about the politics and how the huge conglomerates and huge billionaires are controlling all the different housing prices, a lot of all these new up and rising youngsters do not have access to houses. A lot of them are just renting. They do not have the ability to buy houses. So look at all these different social and economic impact. They are really just trying to guide and social engineer the entire country in a proper and controlled way. They do not want to let things just go run wild and just build up debt and just do whatever they think the free market will do. Always remember that the free market is not the best solution. Of course, there is no alternative to the free market, which is also why government intervention is needed from time to time. And in this case, CCP is really just orchestrating this entire narrative and trying to build the entire country in how they view is best for the citizens of China. Next, concerns over the issue helps explain China's stepped-up attempt to improve competition in e-commerce and other markets and to secure better deals for gig workers such as food delivery drivers who work for online giants such as Meituan. So in tech, China's concerns to some extent mirror those of Western governments about market power, data usage, and other problems. Beijing also saw the sector's power as a challenge to its own. So on this idea of mirroring the Western government, it's true. The then sitting president was banned by Twitter, by Facebook, for so-called spreading fake news. I think the idea of fake news should be decided by the masses because ultimately it's a democracy. We believe in the wisdom of crowds, right? But by having all these big tech companies have a disproportionate effect, even on government officials being able to essentially just delete an account with 80 or 90 million followers. I do think the top leadership cares about foreign investors because in the heightened competition now between the US and China, they know they need to make friends and influence people. And I think what Mr. Chow said, it's a double-edged sword. You can really look at it in this way. And on the other hand, I think it really depends on the priority of the CCP's senior management. And in this case, because of the entire kerfuffle and the evolution of the issue, they did come out to try to appease different investors. So maybe I'll just recommend Chairman Xi to maybe take a look at this book. I think How to Win Friends and Influence People. Maybe he can do a better job at trying to implement all these different social policy. But jokes aside, of course, they would know how to govern their country a lot more than I do because who am I? Just a random guy on the internet. Anyway, for China, that could risk allowing key data such as detailed information about Chinese consumers and government agencies that may be included in the papers to end up in the hands of a foreign government. So this is the problem and the issue of allowing US authorities to have a blanket authority to audit all the different companies as well. So investors shift holdings from Chinese growth stocks into shares elsewhere in the Asia Pacific region. They say that it might be incompatible with likely upcoming strategies. And last but not least, it has been too easy to make money in China. And the last few days have definitely changed that perception, and it's about time. So on top of that, there was this recent article also talking about Beijing's launches fresh crackdown on the internet industry. They did say that China has begun a 6-month campaign to address the tough problems of internet industry, including disturbing market orders, infringing users' rights, threatening data security, and unauthorized internet connection. So this is done by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. None of it is not sensible. A lot of things that they're talking about in whatever they have been saying and propagating over the last 3 to 6 months has always been upright, they have been forefront, and they have been clear about what they're trying to do. In the US case, for example, if let's say Apple do not focus on data privacy, if Apple also looks into a similar business model like Facebook, where they monetize users' privacy or users' data as well, in that hypothetical example, who is then supposed to protect the users' privacy and users' rights? The government? The Congress? They have been having multiple failed attempts in trying to take all these big companies, big tech companies particularly like Google and Facebook to task. There was little to minimal impact on what they're trying to do with all these big tech companies. Because they really do not have the ability to do anything to them. So in this case, it's a blessing in disguise where there's this big war between the two companies like Apple versus Facebook, where Apple focus on user rights, user privacy, while Facebook is just monetizing all of your data. So like I always say, this is to achieve equilibrium. So these two big companies with huge balance sheet, huge revenue generation, and huge customer base, They can seek an equilibrium. But in this case right now in China, there isn't really such an equilibrium. So the China government has to be on the other end to try to balance things out and not allow all these big companies like Tencent, Meituan, Alibaba to go scot-free and to earn this massive amount of revenue at the expense of their workers, at the expense of their employees, which I thought was quite sensible. I don't know what do you guys think, but maybe you can leave in the comment section about what you guys think. Lastly, I would just like to point out that Miller Value Partners, they essentially have a position in Alibaba, and it was quite interesting. They said that Alibaba, one of our largest growth holdings, exemplifies our approach here. We believe that the worst is behind Alibaba. It has already been fined and agreed to changes in how it operates. The government's focus has shifted elsewhere, more recently to Didi, who just barely IPO'd. And the government is partnering with Alibaba to purchase a stake in troubled Suning.com, indicating Baba could be back in the good grace of the government. So Baba has historically grown revenues between 32% in poor years and highs of 50% in stronger years. So it should be able to grow 20% conservatively, implying a similar compound rate of capital if the valuation just holds steady. So ultimately, it's definitely good that some smart people or some smart hedge funds out there who are sharing the same opinion as I do in terms of this Alibaba's trajectory and fundamental value. But I would like to point out what they said. This sentence in neon, it has already been fined and agreed to change in how it operates. Agreeing to change how it operates is part of what the management team says. More often than not, we really have to take a pinch of salt in what the management team says. Having the history of being fined doesn't mean that they cannot be fined again. I wouldn't be so confident that they wouldn't be fined again. But I would agree that the government's focus right now has shifted away from Alibaba, and as you can see, they've been constantly cracking down on the rest of the big tech companies. So who knows, the musical chair might continue running and the government might come back to Alibaba again sometime soon. So that's really just a speculation, but I don't intend for something like that to happen. And next, about Alibaba purchasing a stake in Suning.com, I will not proclaim that Alibaba have already gotten back into the good grace of the government. Like I said, the entire consortium that was orchestrated by Alibaba to purchase Suning.com was done more on the county level than on the senior management level. So who knows, Alibaba might still not be in the good grace of Xi Jinping. And lastly, for those of you who are interested about who is Miller Value Partners, why should I even listen to them? So Miller Value Partners has an AWM of around $3.5 billion. So it's no small amount. And in terms of their Alibaba position right now, you can see that it's around 2.46% of their portfolio. And they own around 416 shares. So that makes up around 90 to 100 million of their portfolio. And in this case, I guess it's not really a very huge position, but of course it's still relatively huge. I would be elated if I even had 100 million in my entire lifetime. But of course, they're hedge funds, right? I'm just an individual. Anyway, please smash the like button if you like this kind of video format where I discuss extensively about some of the hot button topics and hot button issue among the community. And with that, I'll see you in the next video, but more importantly, I'll see you on the moon. Goodbye!